Welcome to the Marshall Pruitt Podcast and our Inside the Sports Car Paddock show, brought to you by Cooper Tires and the Justice Brothers. This is our 21st episode. It can drink, it can vote, it can do just about everything, having turned 21. Our guests this week, the amazing Jeff Braun, as always. Lead off with Jeff, coming out of Watkins Glen International, where the Core Autosport Nissan on-road DPi did not get to play for as long as it had hoped. A little bit of a quick recap of what took place there, but also looking forward to this weekend's IMSA race at Canadian Tire Motorsports Park, aka MoSport. Jeff giving us a bit of a technical rundown of what he and every other race engineer should be looking for in terms of setup and needs to get around the amazing Canadian road course. Then we close on a look at Tpms, or TMS, tire pressure monitoring systems, something that I worked with in the 1990s and early 2000s when I was an assistant race engineer, then also worked with afterwards when I was a race engineer with a variety of other teams, and Jeff using those today, as do so many other race engineers. Interesting to speak about the history of them, not just the background, but also the present, meaning how they get used and the ways that tire pressure information, real-time coming across telemetry, is used by a race engineer, along with some other aspects too within the data system to help make decisions and shape what's done and what gets changed going into a pit stop, etc., etc. Then we move on to James Clay, good friend, old friend of mine as well, talking about his amazing weekend, actually leading into the amazing weekend where he was competing both at Watkins Glen in the Michelin Pilot Challenge Series and also trying to go up the big hill at Pikes Peak in his BMW. His M4, I think he went something like 25 seconds faster this year than he did last year. So he spoke with DailySportsCar.com Stephen Kilby. Following that conversation, DSC's Graham Goodwin, my Week in Sports Cars co-pilot, catches up with John Doonan after Mazda's big win at Watkins Glen. Then we move into the final two interviews, both done by Stephen. First is with Eric Kerub, team principal for the Motorsports In Action Michelin Pilot Challenge team, talking about the season so far, thoughts on running the McLaren 570S GT4 against maybe some newer cars, and also thoughts on a move potentially for MIA to GTD. And then we wrap with Pierre Nicolet, also I guess a manufacturer principal owned by his father. Pierre Nicolet speaks about Ligier's upcoming LMP3 car, their freshening of their LMP3 car, which is out testing right now, and also shares the company's thoughts on both Hypercar and DPi 2.0. So, we have Jeff Braun, James Clay, John Doonan, Eric Kerub, and Pierre Nicolet to close this week's episode of Inside the Sports Car Paddock, brought to you by Cooper Tires and the Justice Brothers. Jeff Braun, it is time for our weekly look into the world of motor racing technology, engineering, strategy, electronics, and who knows what else. We are speaking with you this fine Monday as you are driving from awesome, super awesome Watkins Glen to, I'd say, equally awesome MoSport, aka Canadian Tire Motorsport Park. Tell us a little bit about your technical and engineering weekend at Watkins Glen, and then we'll kick off this week's new show bits on what you're going to look forward to in terms of setup and mindset for MoSport, and then close on tire monitoring systems.
Awesome. Well, good to be with you. Cruising up, getting close to Buffalo on my way driving. It's the glamour of motor racing. Guys are at the track finishing up toward MoSport this afternoon. Ended up ultimately broke an input shaft at about halfway, a little over halfway. I think we had okay pace to the with the Cadillacs, I think we were equal to most of the good Cadillacs. We had nothing for the Mazdas or the Acuras. Those guys were in a league of their own. Really, congratulations to the Mazdas and John Doonan and everybody who's been working so hard there to get that race win. I spent about a year with Sylvain Tremblay on the Mazda program to help them out after my stint at Level 5 and before Core, and so I have a lot of respect for the people at Mazda and all that they've done. So I think the whole paddock was really, really happy to see them win if we couldn't. So yeah, we're off to Mosport, thinking about that, and fortunately it's probably the two back-to-back races we have all year where the setups are the closest, or could be the closest. The tracks have similar characteristics: high speed, flowing, high downforce kind of tracks, pretty smooth. Mosport is a little bumpier, a little more weathered, I would say, a little bit less grip, but the setup's kind of what works at one. Pretty not a bad place to at least start out to unload with, which helps the teams. We don't have to do massive, setup changes from when we don't have much time in between. And most teams are trying to at least squeeze in the 4th of July, although that's setup day this weekend. So we'll all be in Canada on the 4th of July, which is kind of weird. But I think the tracks kind of relate to each other. It's not like going from Detroit to Watkins Glen, where it's completely different.
So looking at unique items we would think of for a Mosport compared to Watkins Glen, I mean, I'm trying to think of any or many, and there aren't. I mean, there's maybe a section or two where the rolling speed is lower, but I don't know. I mean, they seem, as you mentioned, they seem pretty darn close in ideology. What do you find from a setup standpoint? Is there something at Mosport that you prioritize maybe more than you would at Watkins Glen to either produce lap time or a car that races extremely well?
Yeah, yes. And one of the kind of a thing that many people might not think is a setup item, but it does become a setup item, is braking. And Mosport is very, very unique in that it's by far and away the lightest braking, least used braking track we go to. Super fast, but because it's super fast, you don't slow down very much. You use the brakes, you use the brakes kind of hard, pretty hard into turn 5, which is the double right, kind of almost like a hairpin that leads onto the long back straightaway. And that's about it. You hardly touch the brakes anyplace else. So where normally, like Watkins Glen, a good example, we have four brake ducts in the front of our nose on the Ligier Nissan, and 2 in the rear. Those brake ducts were completely open, no blanking, no tape, no blocking of them at all to keep the brakes cool enough. At Mosport, they will almost be completely closed. We'll open them up just enough to let a little air in to keep the uprights cool and to flow a little air across the brakes, but we'll almost close them off completely. And that's really a setup item more than people think, because carbon brakes work in a fairly narrow range of temperature. You can get them too hot, and you can definitely have them too cool, and they just don't stop. And that really affects the grip of the brake, and how the brake is performing really affects the entry to the corner when the driver puts the brake on, whether he gets the proper braking retardation that he's expecting, or whether the rears grab a little more because they're a little hotter, or the fronts aren't hot enough, and then they don't grip good, and that changes the balance, the actual handling of the car tremendously based on how the brakes are operating. So that's a huge difference between the two tracks right there, and it does actually affect setup.
How about from an aero standpoint? I know that when I think of a Watkins Glen setup, there are some very long straights. Those long straights also lead into, by and large, some fairly high-speed corners, so it's not as if you can trim out like mad. What about from a Motorsport standpoint, Jeff? Because if we think of passing zones coming off of the back straight into the final right, left, right complex onto the front straight and pit lane area and whatnot, I mean, that's where we tend to see most passing coming into that super high-speed right-hander, but knowing that the rest of the track is super rolling high-speed too, cornering as well, is there any greater low drag, low downforce balance you can go for at a Motorsport over a Watkins Glen, or not at all?
So, you've just defined the compromise of Motorsport and to some extent Watkins Glen. It's, passing into turn 8, as you said, at the end of the back straightaway, is where you can try to get it done. It's actually where where Colin was able to make the pass for the win there for us last year. But it's pretty hairy to do it around the outside, so you'd like to get it done early. So that would call for trimming the car out. Then so if you do that, then you look at speed to be able to catch a guy that you need to try to pass, and you need to be good in turn 1, 2, 3, which are the high speed, no brake, gear, top of fourth gear kind of corners. So it's that compromise, and be determined by where you qualify or where you expect to be running. If you were to run out front, you might be able to run your high downforce setup. And if you were running toward the back and you needed to pass, your only choice might be to kind of trim out, hope you can get a really good run out of 5A and 5B there onto the back straightaway, get in the guy's draft, and have a low enough drag to be able to kind of pop out and get him before you get into 8, because a high downforce car is going to lead you and pull away from 8 all the way to turn 5 again. So it almost is like two sections of the racetrack: the high speed, high downforce stuff to turn 5, and then the load where you would like low drag down the back straightaway. So it'll be interesting for people to watch how that interaction happens and who's able to pass where. Watkins Glen a little more straightforward because you have the one long straightaway leading up to the bus stop where you can trim out for. But if you do that, you're probably pretty much toast the rest of the racetrack. So more of a compromise and a unique challenge for Motorsport, and based on where you expect to run or where you're starting, where you qualify.
Well, let's close, Jeff, on the new tech item we wanted to cover. It's not new to the world, just new to us discussing this on the 21st episode of Inside the Sports Car Paddock, all led off by a certain Jeff Braun. Tire monitoring systems. I recall, I'm trying to remember the exact first time I worked with them, mid-90s or so, and they weren't new then. They were, well, granted, everything tends to make its way into Formula One, IndyCar, or something like that first, and then filter down to the rest of the series. So, at least as an assistant engineer, learning my trade in some of the junior open-wheel formulas here in the U.S., again, I seem to recall mid-90s or so the first time that I interacted with TMS, and just phenomenal. Hey, whoa, we could actually learn things about the tires while they're on track doing tire-like things. These have obviously since become almost standard equipment on every road car you purchase today, so that's pretty interesting. But why don't we walk through, Jeff, a little bit of background on TMS, when they came in, the purpose that they served originally from an engineering standpoint, and then how it's evolved and how you use it today on pit lane.
Yeah, it's a tremendous technology that's really was driven early from as a safety item. A driver in the past would get a puncture, whether it was a piece of debris or a tire that just failed due to overloading or something like that. And you'd get a puncture, and the driver really wouldn't feel it at first. But what happens is the air comes out of the tire slowly. The tire then fails because it doesn't have any structure. The thing to remember is that the tire structure is really gained by the air pressure that's inside of it. That's what gives it its ability to sustain the loads. If that air pressure goes away, the tire fails, usually at the sidewall to tread joint there, and then blows out. So a lot of times with a puncture, you would have some time to be able to react to it, but you need to know that you have a puncture. And so when they came up with a sensor that would go in the wheel, and it's basically attached to the inside of the valve stem, and it's just a pressure sensor. The tricky part is, obviously, you can't connect a wire to that because the tire's spinning. So they had to come up with battery-operated pressure sensors that were, first of all, light, that wouldn't affect the balance of the tire and the wheel, and that would also be able to transmit when this tire is spinning. And they came up with those sensors that then transmit the pressure inside the tire and also now the temperature of the air inside the tire. They transmit it to a little receiver in the chassis. And so that's like a Bluetooth or a RFID or a low range frequency transmitter that transmits from the sensor to the receiving antenna in the car. Then that is wired into the telemetry system that's then transmitted to the pits so that myself and my tire engineer, Steve Johnson, can look at and monitor the pressures as they build. That information is also displayed on the dashboard for our driver so that he can see his tire pressure build up as we bolt on new tires and the tire pressures build. They can see if he's using the tires too hard, if the pressures are getting too high, and we see all that in the pits as well. And then, of course, the big thing is if we do get a puncture, you'll see immediately the pressure going down in one of the tires. And our Steve, our tire guy, will notice it. I'll notice it. There's alarms on the dash where the driver notices it. And it's prevented many, many serious crashes by the safety aspect. There's also some performance aspects that are tremendous that we can get into as well.
So being able to know the tire pressure really became something that, from a safety standpoint, huge in particular. And I know that this is a sports car driven show, but on ovals in particular, this became something that was highly valuable. Not as if a crash on a road or street course is less of a concern, but if we're thinking Indianapolis 500, Pocono, Texas Motor Speedway, something where Indy cars in particular are traveling 200 plus miles an hour, knowing that you have something going down, or something where you can start to see a trend, like, oh, we're losing a little bit of pressure corner by corner, or, hey, this just happened instantly, a big drop. The ability to tell that driver over the radio, slow down, stop, whatever it is, massive. Not only in terms of driver safety, but also not writing off huge amounts of money as well. So that became invaluable. And so in using the tire monitoring devices through the software, if we're looking back in the day, it would have been through Pi. Today, you can name a variety, whether it's Cosworth, Motec, etc. AIM, where you would set your tire monitoring alarm to work in a certain range, right? If you know, Jeff, that you are expecting your front tires, I'll just say we'll go 25 PSI is the hot pressure you are looking at. You might have your data engineer, your assistant engineer, set some sort of minimum threshold, not necessarily maximum threshold, but some sort of minimum threshold that's going to trigger an alarm to tell you that something's happening. We also, again, if we use a little bit of this oval stuff, because you've done so much of it in your life as well, you might also assign in these big ovals, you might assign one of your, data engineers, or it might be a mechanic, somebody, stare at this screen and look at the 4 tire pressure channels. And we're not waiting for alarms. If you see any fluctuations or something, tap me on the shoulder. So just share a little bit about that.
Yep. Well, and that's exactly where, it was a safety thing at first, like you said, and now it's allowed us to operate our cars better, more efficiently, and make changes quicker. Because here's what happened in the past. You would run, a set of tires. The driver would, during the race, you would run a set of tires. Driver might describe the handling, or you might have your hot target, like you said, 25 PSI, where you knew that worked really good in practice, and that's where you wanted to hit. You run your first set of tires, come in for a pit stop, take the tires off. Tire guy runs over there, tire engineer runs over, measures the pressure, and the fronts are 28 PSI. You're like, oh man, too high. We know that's going to cause understeer. That's why the driver had the understeer problem. But the driver's out with the second set of tires now at the same pressures that the first set were. So you're going to make your tire pressure adjustment to the third set. You're going to take some out of the front to get them to come in at 25, where the car handles the best. So you're a set behind because he's out there. You have to read the first set to know that you're off. Well, with the Tpms sensors now, my tire guy, Steve, he's sitting there. He has a computer in front of him. Tire guys in the old days were these tire buster guys, all black and nasty and dirty and everything. And with, it was those kind of guys. Well, Steve's an engineer. He's looking at those tire pressures, watching exactly what they're doing, watching how their live pressures as the car goes around the racetrack. He's watching in sports cars. You have the unique case of 2, 3, or 4 different drivers driving the same car. They all drive differently, and they use the tires differently. So Steve's looking at how each driver is using the tires. Okay, this driver uses the front tire more, or boy, he really leans on the left rear and it heats that up. I'll have to take some pressure out for him on the left rear when he gets in, and the next driver is going to do this, so I know what adjustments to make. And then as the car's running, he'll watch and he'll see, wow, today's conditions, or, he's running in traffic a lot and he's lost downforce on the front of the car. Therefore, the front of the car is sliding and it's heating up the front tires more. I need to back off the tire pressures on the front on the next set. So he can proactively adjust tire pressures for the set that's going to go on the car rather than being one set behind because of the tire pressure monitoring system that we have. So it becomes a critical component of our telemetry to be able to react much quicker to handling changes, just like you would when we can see what he's doing with the throttle or what he's doing with the brake, or how the car is balanced looking at our push rod loads. It's just another one of those components. But with tires, it lets you get one step ahead, which has been fantastic for performance. It was better when I was the only guy that had that and nobody else did, or very few others did. but now everybody has it, so it's the ball game is equal, and now we're all using the same thing.
Well, let's close on this aspect, Jeff, and we'll probably get into this as a separate topic in the future as well. Also knowing how, again, if we just talk more traditional process, and I shouldn't even say just traditional, because it may be someone's reality today running their club racing car, or who knows what. But for those who might be fortunate to have tire monitoring system in place on cars that aren't in full pro series like IndyCar, IMSA, etc., the normal routine is you might be getting pressure information, but you're going to come in and stop on pit lane, and whether it's you or a crew member going to grab your temperature probe the surface of the tires, give you also temperature data across the carcass to then marry with the pressure information, help you figure out what you want to do change-wise. Not just, obviously, tire inflation, but camber, caster it, and whatnot. We also, though, if we move into, mostly the higher levels of pro racing, it's not uncommon for teams to have at least one infrared sensor pointed at the tire surface. In some instances, you have an array. So instead of just getting, say, one beam pointed at the center of the tire, possibly an array of multiple infrared sensors pointed at the tire. So effectively getting real-time rolling tire probe information, if you want to think of it that way. How do you then, Jeff, if we're talking, this past weekend or any other event, how would an engineer make use of your tire pressure information coming to you live through telemetry plus live infrared information as well? Part of me thinks it'd be really good. Part of me also thinks your brain might explode because it's a lot to process.
Yeah, you can definitely get data overload, and that's why there's currently at Core, that's why there's me and Tyler and Lee and Henry and Steve, our tire guy. There's 5 of us looking at incoming data. And I really should add Ian, our crew chief, who monitors all the incoming brake data to adjust the brake blinking. So there's 6 of us looking at incoming data, and still we're overloaded at times. So it can be too much, and you just have to start throwing out the stuff that isn't significant at that moment, but know where to look at it if it suddenly becomes significant. So for tire temperatures, it's another piece. It's probably more historically important than real-time important. But it gives us as you said, the temperature of the surface of the tire, infrared sensors normally. And even they're using some photographic heat sensing cameras now that will do, like people have seen the cameras that come around in your house to take pictures, and it shows the red spots and the blue spots where you're leaking air under your doors and stuff like that. But we have the same kind of thermal imaging pictures that you can do of the tire surface and actually record that data. And that's helpful on a historical basis. If you have, you're looking for trends. The car really worked good when the temperature across the tire was this much. The inside temperature was 20 degrees hotter than the outside temperature. And that seems to be the right camber angle when we can get that. And then your car really worked good then. And then you go to another track and you're seeing only 10 degrees across the tire. You might say, well, we know 20 was better normally. We could add some more camber to get that temperature spread that we want. So you're looking at, from that standpoint, kind of developing over the experience with a tire. We're new to the Michelin tire this year after running Continentals for years in IMSA. And so a lot of teams are building that database, and those tire pressure and as you said, the temperature sensors become part of going into that database to understand where that tire really likes to operate on your particular car. Where it operates on our Ligier might be different than where it works well on a Dallara or a Orica or a Multimatic Mazda. So we're trying to use the temperature sensors to give us that, and then check to see whether we're operating in the range that we think is the proper best range for that tire on our car.
And, dear listeners, to Inside the Sports Car Paddock, once again, we just got smarter. All courtesy of our pal, Jeff Braun. I don't mind stating this from time to time just because it makes me smile and makes me happy, but I'm very proud to have known you for, well, this is the scary part. 2021 will be 30 years, I think, when we first met and worked together.
Probably. We're old guys, Marshall.
Well, I know. My wife tells me I got to dye my beard again because my hair hasn't gone silver, but my beard certainly is, a little silverback-ish. But anyways, just glad that we can do this and keep doing this and enjoy this, my friend, having known each other for a long time, having had the good fortune to work together and whatnot. So pretty cool that even many, many years down the road, we're still finding fun stuff to do together, even if it's just talking about sporty cars and technology on a weekly basis.
It's fun. I enjoy it. It's been fun working with you, and it's no different than when we were engineering together on Formula Atlantic cars at Pfeiffer Ridge Racing, or working together to try to do a good podcast that people enjoy. It's always a pleasure working with you.
Well, going to look forward to our conversation after Mosport. And, I don't know how many folks come up to you. You say that folks come up to you in the paddock and say that they enjoy these conversations. So maybe if, while you're in Canada, if anybody has any ideas, or if you are a Canadian listener planning to be at Mosport and happen to see Jeff, give us some more ideas. And we already have a spreadsheet that's growing, but if we have a special recommendation from Canada, coming out of Canada for next week's show, would really look forward to that too. So, all right, my friend, yeah. Well, hopefully input shafts, output shafts, all kinds of shafts stay together so you and the team can play a little bit longer this weekend. Look forward to our conversation here in about a week's time, and thanks as always for making some time, Jeff.
Sounds great. No problem. Looking forward to the Canadian fans. Lots of people at Watkins Glen were like, hey, love your Marshall Pruitt podcast. And so, it seems to be working good. The Canadian fans are super knowledgeable. They always have been about sports car racing. So, yeah, let's make that one. Somebody in Canada's got to come up to me and come up with a topic, and we'll make sure we hit that next week. We'll
do the entire show in metric units. So something like that. All right, brother.
Sounds good. Thanks, Marshall.
Welcome, James Clay, who's from BimmerWorld in the Michelin Pilot Challenge. And I think it's safe to say, James, before we get into talking specifically about Watkins Glen and the title battle that you've got in your hands there, it's going to be quite a weekend for you. Tell the listeners just what you're up to this weekend, because you're not just going to Watkins Glen, are you?
No. It's in fact I've been out in Colorado Springs or Pikes Peak right next door. We're in the middle of the 97th running of the Pikes Peak International Hill Climb. So we were testing there last weekend and then back out. I've been on the mountain since Monday. Just actually finished up the morning run up the mountain this Thursday morning, starting at 3 o'clock. So we were running at the break of dawn at 5.
Tell us a little bit about what you're going to be driving at Pikes Peak.
That car is getting prepped, and I'm in the airport right now to head to Watkins.
Sorry, cut out there. What's the car you're participating in?
So we are. It's a very similar car. It's a BMW M4 GT4. Same spec with just a couple of small differences that we're running at Watkins as well.
That's going to be quite a comparison then for you to take on something like Pikes Peak and Watkins Glen the same weekend in pretty much the same machinery.
Absolutely, it's we had this monster build going. That's kind of 2 years in the making, and unfortunately 3 days short of coming to fruition for this year. So it wasn't really the car that we planned to bring to the mountain. But we had one in the shop, and it was easy enough to prep it and get it ready, and it's just been absolutely flawless. So, and then it's the same car that I'll be racing this weekend. So, I love the continuity.
What's the sort of the preparation for this been like? How long ago did you decide that this was actually possible to do both events on the same weekend?
I've been piecing this together for almost a year. So, and it's unfortunately, that just meant that I recognized they were kind of at the same time, and I just was going to figure it out. And it really wasn't until maybe 4 or 5 days ago that I put together all the logistics and all the flights and so forth to actually make it happen. It's kind of almost all the time where there's a will, there's a way. And I had some certainly some expensive options to make it all happen, but I think luckily it's actually been fairly reasonable and no private flights or anything like that to make it happen. So, yeah, lucked out.
So just for the listeners' sake, are you a regular at Pikes Peak? Is this something that you've always wanted to do and had your mindset on this weekend particularly, or this year? What's the planning behind it been like?
It's been. I ran it first in 2017, 2 years ago. Optima Batteries, which is our title sponsor for the Michelin Pilot Challenge car as well. It kind of gave me the nudge of, hey, we're looking for some key events and just unique things. It was on my list. As a kid, I used to watch it on whatever, Speed Vision at one point. Before then, it was probably Wild World of Sports. But, I'd seen it as a kid. It kind of made a mark, and it was always seemed like something cool to do. But really a big thanks to Optima Batteries for making me think a little bit outside the box, because honestly, it's not something I would have probably put the pieces together to actually do until that 2017 year. And then, of course, in 2017, first year on the mountain, and it did fairly well, but brought a naturally aspirated car. And when you're running that high up, we started 9,000 feet above sea level and raced to 14,000. You've got to bring something with forced induction that makes its own altitude or atmospheres for you. So we've been putting this monster build in the works since then. And again, it's just taken forever because it's grown along the way. And I can't wait to run it. And certainly it'll be on the mountain next year. But I'll probably be there for the foreseeable future, just so I can make this thing pay off and make it, get it truly dialed in for what's truly a unique event.
Obviously, the big part of the challenge is the mountain itself, but you'll be up against obviously other competitors. What are there? Plenty of GT4 cars that you're going to be up against, or is it a mixture?
It's not. There's no one formula for cars on that mountain. And there's actually some GT4 spec cars in a Porsche Cup version, with that Cayman GT4, and they have 4 or 5 of those. But of course, I'm sure we know about BOP with this audience. The BOP at 14,000 feet is worlds different than it is at normal racetrack level, and there's no way to even have parity with a naturally aspirated Cayman and a BMW with a couple of turbos on it. And so we just really are different cars up there. But the best thing about the GT4 is it's just a well-prepared race car. So, it's maybe not exactly what I choose to take. I'd probably rather have something with big turbos on it, much bigger than factory, and that really makes 800 or 900 horsepower. But when you don't get that car built in time, then and you have a perfectly good race car sitting in the shop, it's a great option to take. A lot of competitors are in the kind of mountain focused builds, are certainly the ones at the pointy end of the field are going to be in cars that are truly made to be on the mountain. But we're going to do the best we can, and so far we've been doing pretty well.
So how does the schedule work this week? How much time are you going to spend at each venue?
So we started Monday on the mountain with just running up and down in a rental car. At Pikes Peak, one of the most logistically challenging events anyway, aside from combining it with something else. We're on the mountain at about 3:30 in the morning. We've got the car unloaded, ready to run at 5 in the morning. Our day on the road is done by 8:30 or 9 in the morning. That's when the mountain opens up to tourist traffic on every day except for race day on this coming Sunday. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we've run a different section of the mountain each day, qualified on Wednesday. And then there is a practice session on Friday. It's just a repeat of one of the sections of the mountain, but we're going to skip that. I can't jam it quite all in. So that's Pikes. So off the mountain today, 9 a.m. Scramble to the airport with IMSA this afternoon. But the car's in good hands with Evan Jones, my co-driver, on the team there, and he'll start to work on that. I'll jump in and practice tomorrow, and of course practice qualify. Saturday race, 4-hour race, one of our longer 4 hours. We have both Watkins Glen and Daytona are 4-hour events, and then so I'll start the race, and somewhere between an hour and a half and 2.5 hours, I'll hop out, jump in a car, and scramble to an airport and cheer on Devon from afar.
I mean, obviously, Pikes Peak is a huge event in itself, and that is going to, take a lot of your focus this weekend. But you have obviously got the Pilot Challenge title battle to consider in all this. Tell me a little bit about the season so far and what you think your chances are like for the remaining rounds, because it does look like we've got a handful of cars now that look like they're going to be in contention for the long haul.
Absolutely. There's good cars running up front. We got a little bit of a lead on it with a solid Daytona and Sebring finish, but got reeled back in a little bit. Unfortunately, with that Mid-Ohio race with mixed conditions, and we made the wrong tire choice. I don't mind rain. I love driving in the wet. I love driving in the dry, but the mixed conditions where it just kind of comes down to sometimes luck or a crapshoot. It's not my favorite way to race. So and of course we were on the bad end of that at Mid-Ohio. Made the wrong tire choice and lost some points, but it certainly closed the field up a little bit as well. So I believe we're right at the front still, not leading, but a couple points out. But a few more cars have joined us in the front. So I think it's really, to me, a little bit too early in the season to think championship. But I know you absolutely have to win races and score points, and that's what we're focused on doing. And maybe 3 races to the end, we'll see where we are, and maybe change our perspective a little bit, maybe change our approach. But for right now, we're just out there to be at the front, doing a fairly good job of it.
And how big is the Watkins Glen race, do you think, for you guys with the BMW? I mean, it's a track that we know is not the easiest on the tyres. You've also got to factor in the fact that it's going to be a very hot weekend. Is this a round that's very crucial for you guys to score points at, do you think?
I think I don't know that we're going to be at the front of the pack. I liked Mid-Ohio for that, for our BMW and what suits the current car. I've always said Watkins is good for BMW in general, though, because the BMWs just kind of do everything well. They brake well. They make good power. I don't think we have quite the downforce, and so I'm a little bit worried about the tire degradation. But this is the first race that we are now switching to that Michelin harder compound, and in testing of that for us, that's been just a rock solid, reliable tire. So I think that's something we can lean on. And it's the weather's hot, but it's 85 degrees hot versus last year. I think we were pushing 100, and the 100 was challenging, in the car and on the car itself. But I think we're a little bit better off than last year, and I think we finished second last year. So not bad, and I think the car has it in it. So fingers crossed that we'll have a good result in it, and then of course if you're near the front, you better score the points. If you have the opportunity, if you have the car, you better make it happen. So, I think we will. We usually convert fairly well.
Final question, because obviously one of the big talking points in the paddock this year is unsurprisingly the fact that we've had this tyre change from Continental to Michelin. And the feedback that I've had has been pretty much positive across the board. But I've not spoken to anyone who's been in the sort of BMW camp. How are you finding the Michelins on the M4?
They're just fine. I think so often, the tires are the same tires that everybody else is on. I think, I guess specific to our car model, I think, I would point at the Audi and say that's a car that has really good downforce. Maybe not always the best straight line speed, but because of the downforce, it's going to be really good on tires, and especially a softer tire. So I think that gives them a little bit of the nod, especially on that 8 compound in hotter weather, which we had at Sebring. And we'll have at Laguna. I'm a little concerned about being on the softer compound later in the season, especially at that track with such tremendous tire deg. But now that we're on the 9, we'll see. We'll see what happens with the field. But personally, with our car, and without comparing our car to others, which I haven't had the opportunity to do yet, I feel really good that it's given us a consistent platform, which was probably our biggest challenge challenge on the 8. We just had to be a little bit careful not to use too much tire too early with that softer compound.
Well, one of the happiest men in sports car racing this morning, I'm sure, is going to be Mazda's John Doonan. John, that was some race and some weekend.
Unbelievable, Graham. I'm still at a loss for words. Can't believe it. And I've sent a text message to all the drivers this morning saying, can you believe it? Because it really still feels a little bit surreal and like a dream. And it's also only just one race. There's so many teams, the Action Expresses of the world, the Wayne Taylors, the Penske's, that have won so many races. And but to be honest with you, the journey that we've been on, this one feels like a championship or the greatest of all time at the moment, because it's just been such a long journey.
It was one of those races where the cars, let's be blunt, dominated on pace. That struck me as being probably a surprise.
It was a big surprise. We have a ton of respect and really appreciate the IMSA BOP process. I really, really believe that they certainly have added a ton of resources, have done a yeoman's job of making it what it is. The show is unbelievable in all levels. These races, 24 hours, 12 to 1 hour 40, are coming down to the last minutes, and you can't ask for much more for the audience. Exciting. And so we knew the cars would be good here, and frankly hoped that they're just as good at Canadian Tire Motorsports Park and Road America and Laguna Seca and Road Atlanta. But I thought we were in for a big fight based on how practice was trending and even qualifying. I thought, man, we are going to have our hands full. It's going to be another major fight between any of the eight cars. My friend Stephen Charlesley from Multimatic said, any car, 8 cars can win this thing every weekend now. And so early on, those stints, we were in a little bit of a state of shock. Like, are they all saving it for the end? Are they expecting that something will befall us as it has in the past? It's a long race, but thank the Lord it hung in there, and the cars were just magnificent all day.
There were 2 big fights, both towards the end of the race. One with, Jean Barbosa clearly not wanting to be passed for a second time. That must have left out the mouth. And then, who would you least want to be between you and your first win but Juan Pablo Montoya? Take us through those moments.
Yeah, so massive respect for Bob Johnson and the Action Express organization. They've won so many races and so many championships. So they're there to battle. They're there to win. They're there to put themselves in a position to win. So as frustrating it is when you're sort of dicing it up with a car that's down a lap. You can't fault anybody in this series for wanting to stay in the fight, especially in a 6-hour race. And based on the way the regulations work in IMSA, you always have a chance to get it back. And so, yes, was it tense? Was it frustrating? Was Tristan and Olivier at the time getting frustrated? You bet. But I've got massive respect for everyone in that team and the driver lineup, and they were doing what they had to do. And so, sure made some exciting moments, I'll tell you, but that one in particular. And then the same goes for the Penske organization. You can't fault them for obviously taking an opportunity on that, what was going to be a yellow. They jumped in, they jumped to the front, and they were doing everything they could. And fortunately, Harry and Oliver got by him, and even then, we had some more tense moments at the end for us. It was a wild day.
Well, at least you got a souvenir for the garage wall. I'm sure you'll be taking that part of that engine cover, get the boys to sign it, and put it on the wall there, John. What happened there?
Ironically, we also have a souvenir from the 6 car. When Harry and JPM touched, we picked up part of their front side pod, so to speak. So They were the crew. The crew was joking about maybe trying to get him to sign it, but I'm not so interested in that.
Was that the incident that caused the damage to the rear deck?
I think that there was also, I believe, a slight touch with the GT car, but that definitely on the left side, that touch when Harry went to the apex and was able to get by in 8, that caused the engine cover, I think, to just loosen a bit. And ironically, after looking at it at the end of the race, it was simply it was almost like it was hinged. And maybe we need to think about doing that to make ease of working on the car. But it was almost like there in the UK. It was like an old Bugatti or an MG where you could just hinge the hood up a little bit and work on it. But it was all attached. It was just flopped over.
It's a brilliant result for the 55. Well, the fact that it came home with a 1-2 just, I guess, adds to that legend. But at what point did the guys get the message, it's time to hold station?
Before the race went green.
Yeah.
And I woke up yesterday morning and I had a gut feel that we needed to sit down with the drivers. And I texted Larry Holt and Stephen Charlesley from Multimatic, and I said, I feel the need to just have a meeting this morning and get everybody's mindset in the right place. And I got to tell you, the 6 guys that are in the seat right now all wanted a team victory. And the meeting was very short. It was behind the pit box, and it was a clear message that a Mazda has the potential of winning today. It doesn't matter what numbers it is. It's just either one of them is going to be a red Mazda. And if we're in that position, and unanimously, all the drivers said, "You just tell us from the box. We'll do whatever you say." And frankly, there wasn't a lot of that at the end when we were running 1-2, and Oliver was on Harry's bumper. No one really asked about it. It was, we looked at the difference to us in the 6 car, and there was no need to fight. And we agreed, and everybody just kind of it was pretty quiet on the pit box from, say, 30 minutes to go on after the final round of stops. And when we got by, it was just everybody was quiet, and I think watching the clock tick down.
Great stuff. Now, I guess the next question is, almost penultimate question, really. Does this feel like maybe the monkey's off the back now?
Big relief, without a doubt. We, from the beginning of this thing, said we have been coming to win, and so many close moments and so many people, fans, friends, dealers, Mazda dealers, that is, and racers, Mazda racers saying, it's going to come, and, so many people in the paddock, other OEM partners, other team members saying, man, we sure hope you guys get one soon. And so, huge relief. Alwyn Springer on Thursday night came up to me at the International Motorsports Research Center dinner that honored Bobby Rahal, and he said, would you win an effing race? So, he texted me last night with congratulations, and I said, Thursday night you delivered the orders, and fortunately we were able to deliver the result that we have been wanting so badly to deliver for everyone at Mazda, whether it's somebody driving a Mazda up the motorway or racing a Mazda or selling them or designing and building them. It's a really special family, and our brand is all about inspiration, and to see it all come together was very inspiring for me, and I hope inspiring for everybody in the community.
Well, let's see whether or not that leads to greater things. There's still a long way to go in this championship, and it's pretty clear that you've got the win literally beneath the wings of those 2 Mazda RT 24Ps, John. Onwards to Canada.
Yeah, we're going to really short turnaround. The team's rebuilding the cars today. I'm on the way to the airport. Everybody's kind of scattering, but we're literally going to reunite here in about 72 hours, and hopefully a track like Canadian Tire Motorsports Park also caters to our package, and so does the remaining other three. So, yeah, the monkey's off the back, but I can't wait to share my thoughts with the team this morning in my post-weekend briefing, and it's going to be all about holding our heads high but not having our chests puffed out, because we know what the level of competition is in the WeatherTech Championship, and everyone's going to come to the next one loaded for bear.
Excellent stuff. For now, John Doonan, thank you very much for your time, and good luck in Canada.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and all the listeners out there, we appreciate you guys tuning in.
I've got Eric Kerub with me now, the owner of Motorsports In Action, a team that races in Michelin Pilot Challenge with McLaren. Hey Eric, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Obviously it's a big week for you, because it's obviously the home race for the team. Before we get into the challenges of racing at CTMP in Pilot Challenge with the 570S GT4, I want to talk a little bit about the season so far, because I think it's safe to say it's had its little ups and downs, but overall it's been a real success for you guys, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's a real turnaround from last year, that's for sure. It made the winter break between races much more enjoyable than last year, that's for certain. We started off with 2 podiums, championship lead, and I think, the last couple of races, we erred on the side of caution when it came to some decision and some strategies, and, we really took our time to second-guess ourselves more than we should, I believe, and I think the results of, I believe, P7 and now P8 was a demonstration of our over-cautious approach, I think. Outside of the fact that the Glen, we just didn't have the pace compared to the BMW and the Mercedes, but we could have been higher in the pecking order. But the season so far is good. 7 points off, the championship lead, which is quite a lot because, when you look down the order, everything's separated by a point, like 2 points and 4 points, and so we've got some work to do to catch up.
Luckily, it's a quick turnaround, so you can go straight into racing again. It's a nice rhythm to be able to do that, I'm sure. And you've obviously got the big one at CTMP this weekend. Just give me a sort of a flavour of what it means for you as part of the sort of Canadian contingent that uses this round each year as sort of the chance to be able to race in front of home fans and home guests.
No, it's fantastic. That's one of the, it's our home race, technically speaking, and as well as Compass, probably theirs more than ours because they are from Toronto. But yes, it makes it easier for friends, family, guests, fans. They all come down from Montreal and come support. And it's a nice venue, other places are more remote and difficult with hotels, as you know, like the Glen and Lime Rock and what have you. So it's a great. It's right after Canada Day. We feel good. It's a track that not only is our home track, but it's actually best suited for our car. That is the reference track for our car as far as the characteristics, and we want to get back fast because we left the Glen not where we wanted to be, and we're glad that there's a quick turnaround for sure, and we get to do it in front of our fans.
You've obviously got Jesse Lazar and Cory Fergus driving for you, and we know what they're capable of. Those are two of the best drivers that GS has to offer. But like you say, the car should be suited to CTMP. Tell us a little bit more about that. Give us a bit more insight on where you think the strengths of the 570S GT4 are in its current form. Obviously, it's had a little bit of a tweak this year, and why it suits that circuit.
Yeah, it's, in full transparency also, the Glen doesn't suit our car. It was, the gearing we were in between gears, and the corners are not what suits the car. I think the 570, it loves either second gear corners to get out. It's got great torque and really fast sweepers. Like if you saw the race at the Glen, we were really, our strength was from corner one going up the S's, and after that we were just in deep trouble against the other manufacturers. So the short track, the most sport, the old school flow of the track, the fast sweepers, and then the 5AB, hit the brakes, turn and punch yourself out of that corner. It's tailor-made for our car. Our car has some weight, so it likes to keep moving. And it doesn't like to be in between gears. And we found that the Glen, we were in between gears several places. So that is the reference. How we do there is the best, track for us. So we'll really have an idea of, the state of the car and performance once we finish Motorsport. And we knew that the Glen and DIR coming up also are two of the tracks that are not really suited for us. So we're looking forward to it, that's for sure.
This is a big season for IMSA, isn't it? We've got obviously the festivities surrounding the fact that it's the 50th anniversary. The WeatherTech Championship's doing incredibly well. It's got a great TV package, a lot of really good teams, but it mustn't be forgotten that support package it carries around with it is fantastic as well, isn't it? Give some of the listeners a bit of a sense of just how competitive Pilot Challenge is, if it's something that they don't follow specifically, because it's got manufacturers, it's got good drivers, it's got stunning looking cars, and it goes to the fantastic selection of circuits that IMSA has each year.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely the best GT racing, I think, in the world, and I say that with as much non-bias as I can, being a fan of other series and watching them when I'm at home. So I keep my eye on, European series, Asian series. And I think that the level of talent that we have here and the young drivers that are in our field are just unbelievable. I mean, a lot of them do double duties. They'll go to GTD or GTLM, and they it's 28 cars on the field, all different manufacturers. IMSA's doing the best job they can, for now. With the BOP, obviously, I think the BMW and the Mercedes got away from us a little bit. Maybe they'll make some adjustments, but they try to keep the field as tight as possible and leave it up to the drivers and the teams, to make the right calls and the right strategy and execute the right pit stops. I think it's the only series that I know of at this caliber that runs GT4s with real hot pit stops. So driver change, fuel, pit stop. Every second you lose or gain in the pits is a second you gain or lose on the track. And that's what makes it super appealing as opposed to sprint racing. So yeah, it's got drivers, if you look at their resumes online, which I do because I like to know who the competition is, it's unbelievable, their resumes. Their Wikipedia page or their driver database, they've won championships and everything they've done, wins, fastest laps. And these are all in our series. So it really is the highest level of competition. I really, truly believe that in the GT4 series for himself.
I'm interested on your thoughts as a team owner who's part of the IMSA paddock, what you think of things like Prototype Challenge now, because it does offer, of a similar level, shall we say, of motorsport, quite a cost-effective way of going racing. And we're seeing, obviously, with the new LMP3 cars that are going to be coming in for next season, but not quite yet in Prototype Challenge, but that seems to be growing as well. What are your thoughts on racing in Prototype Challenge as well?
Well, quite honestly, it's not really my goal. We spoke last time. I think my end goal still is to be in GTD and stick with McLaren. I think that the fact that they introduced the Sprint Championship this year is something that's much more cost effective than going straight from GT4 to the full GTD season. It's an architecture that we're familiar with as far as a car. My associates from McLaren for a long time now, so we have familiarity with the whole group, the program, the car, the architecture. That's my end game. Not that any other series isn't worth exploring at any given time. If we had an opportunity and there was money involved for somebody who wanted to run, we would have, of course, explore it. But for us, it's really GT4 until the next step would be GTD.
I've got to ask you, in terms of McLaren, because obviously we've had 4 races of this season now, and there was so many changes in the back end of McLaren's customer racing program over the last sort of 12 months, and obviously it's something that you and all the other McLaren customer teams have been keeping a wry eye on. How's it been this year? Have you been impressed with the changes they've made? Obviously they've updated the car, but customer service is something they're focusing on. Have they met your expectations?
Yeah, so far I think, and I'm going to quote them so they won't get mad at me, I think they're at a 7 on 10 right now, but this came from a 0 on 10. As you know, we had a vacuum for 18 months during the court case. So CRS were not developing, and McLaren were not allowed to develop or communicate with us. So for 18 months leading up to the beginning of the season, I think it got settled when? In November, December of the year, right before the season started. So they're drinking a little bit through a fire hose, that's for sure. They had to build, design, and homologate the 720S GT3, which they put a lot of effort on, and they put a team to address the 570S GT4 issues from reliability. There's not much they can do with the platform at this point without re-homologating the car, so that wasn't the plan. Then they're going to wait for the next gen to come up with their own, design and package. I'm looking forward to see what they come up with. But as far as support, they've been there. They've got their parts truck now. They have, emails turn around quick. Support is there. Phone calls are there. Everything's a lot different now. So I'm very happy, and I think I would grade them the same as they grade themselves right now, 7. But it's improving, daily, monthly. No question about that. We sense we have a manufacturer with us now.
And that must instill enough confidence in you to say that if you did, jump up to racing in GTD, that you would carry on using their platforms. I know that you have a particular affinity for the brand, and maybe there's plenty of listeners out there who wouldn't know just how loyal, I guess is the word, you are to McLaren. But would you hesitate at all in picking the 720S platform if you were to go to GTD?
That would be the ultimate goal. I think because of my friendship and relationship with McLaren over the past 40 years, it'd be tough for me to entertain a different brand. I know we did have a customer for GTD that's courting us, and he's looking for a different brand. And my race shop, they're looking to get in no matter what. So my crew chief Carl Hermes and the boys, they want to get in GTD. And if there's a mechanism where we can grab a Pro-Am combination with a different brand, therefore it, I am more of a loyalist, and it's a little bit of a tough one for me as well. So we might be trying to convince them that the 720 is the way to go. We just need to see them reliable, and they've been reliable right now. I think the BOP is not where it should be because of some great performance I had at the beginning of the year, and everybody was overly cautious about giving them what they wanted. So slowly but surely it's climbing back up as far as performance for BOP, but the reliability is what I think most drivers are concerned about, especially when they're doing GTD races, which is, involves like 4 endurance races. Even if it wasn't a sprint, it needs to be reliable. These cars go at ridiculously fast speed. They have tons of load, tons of Gs. Everything has to stick on the car and work all the time. And if McLaren keeps the reliability up for the rest of the year, I think that they'll have a lot of customers.
From speaking to you and to some of your team over the last sort of 12 months since I was first introduced, it's one of the things that surprised me about the operation that you've got is it's far more than just a team that's racing in GS. You're able to give listeners a bit of an insight in just how big Motorsports In Action's operation is, because as I understand, you have involvement in other motorsport championships as well.
Yeah, the shop actually is it's a multi-faceted department shop. We have we build sports cars, we restore classic cars, old Ferraris, old Jags. We have other departments, but the racing department outside of IMSA, we also build exclusively for Nissan Canada and Nissan Japan the Nissan Micro Cup, which is a Canadian Group B racing series here. And with that, we field some customer cars as well. So we'll always, run anywhere from 4 to 5 cars for customers. But the actual car comes from our shop. It's spec'd at our shop, and the only way to get one is through Motorsports In Action. So we designed the whole car with the blessing of Nissan Japan. We have the, CAD FIA approved cages, and we had to do 50 hours of continuous running. Well, not continuous meaning, with breaks, but like 3-4 hours at a time for a total of 50 hours for Nissan to give us the green light, because they wanted to make sure their product, which was never intended for racing, would would work, would not fall with failures and transmission and engine issues, and it never did. We did the full 50 hours, and the cars were running as if they came out of the showroom. So that's one of our other racing endeavors, and we do some club racing for gentlemen racing as well. We'll do arrive and drive packages, but IMSA really is the focus. I mean, if you want to really consider our racing efforts, it really is IMSA and winning the championship this year, or trying to anyways.
Yeah, and that was going to be my final question. There's a 7-point gap now. From your guys sitting in third at the moment. We've got plenty of races left to go. Just leave us with what it's going to take for you guys to win this championship this year.
A lot of it, some of it is not in our hands, and not, like I said, I think IMSA are doing a fantastic job as far as DOP up to now, but they need to react quickly. The biggest problem we had last year, as you witnessed, was the first 6 months of the year we were nowhere to be seen. We were midfield and we had no adjustments, no help. And I think they've taken a new approach. They're not just focusing on VMAX, they're focusing on lap times. And to discuss what's out of our hands first, the BOP needs to be there. Doesn't mean we need to be the fastest every weekend. As long as we open our doors and we have an ability to win with proper driving, clean driving, great pit stops, great strategy, we need to be able to win. I think at the Glen this weekend, there was nothing we could have done, even if we had everything right to win. The pace was there. So with a little bit of help from IMSA to get BOP right for all cars, and we're not the worst off, believe it or not. And I'm not our competitors. I believe at Porsche, they're worse off than us. But if IMSA gets the BOP right and acts quickly, I think we just need to execute. We have, like you said earlier, the best. I believe some of the best two drivers in the grid. We have a great car. Our pit stops have always been flawless. Our strategy has been on the cautious side, but I think, Stephen, this weekend we're going to turn it up. Cautious got us left points on the table for us in the last two races that we could have gotten more. So we're going to turn up the heat from Motorsport, and we're going to go towards an aggressive approach for the win, as opposed to just nurturing championship points.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for your time, Eric, and I wish you the best of luck this weekend.
Thank you very much.
I've got with me now Pierre Nicolet. He's the Executive Officer of Ligier Automotive. Pierre, well, before we go any further and talk about the big topics like IMSA DPi and Hypercar and where Ligier stands on that, I want to talk about something that's a bit more of a closer to home topic. We've got the new LMP3 cars coming out next year. We've seen them for the first time at Le Mans. Give me your impressions before we go anywhere else on what we've got to come with the new LMP3s.
Hello everyone. So we've presented the new Ligier GSP320 at Le Mans 24 hours. We have submitted, all manufacturers have submitted the CAD files of their entire new car for 2020 to the ACO prior to the 1st of July. And we are undergoing on-track testing now to develop and finalize the car for teams and drivers to test the car by September. We have already done straight line testing and on-track testing with our development car using the new engine, the VK56, and we will continue to do so for the entire month of July. We are happy with the team's feedbacks on the update on the car. Some have already committed, like United Autosport, AF Corse, and other European team to run the car for 2020. So we need to continue and finish the development of the car for the teams to start their program by the end of the year to be ready for the start of the next season.
When we spoke last about LMP3, you told me that you didn't think customer teams wouldn't take them much time to get used to the new chassis and the new engine, before next season once they get their cars. Now that you've actually hit the track of it, what are your impressions with the updated JSP 320 and the engine? Is it still what you expected?
Yes, I think in terms of drivability and operations from a team's perspective or a driver's perspective, it remains a very easy car to operate. And with the addition of traction control, it should be even easier to drive for beginners to pro drivers. So I don't think there is any hurdles for a team that have been operating LMP3 in the past to get accustomed with the new one. And for a racing team in general, I think it's a pretty easy car to operate.
So now that we've seen at least two of the other chassis at Le Mans, we saw the new Ginetta, we saw the new Adesse, the Duquesne chassis appeared to be a very slight evolution of the old one, so we're not sure exactly where they stand right now. But what are your impressions of the competition, and how hard is it going to be for you guys to retain such a huge customer base? Because we understand there's obviously over 100 cars in circulation that you've got of the old chassis.
Only the future will tell. I think every existing team in LMP3 will look at what all of the manufacturers have to offer for the next regulation. New team willing to enter in LMP3 will look at what they see available as of a new car, or what they can do with an updated car. I think it's very early to say where everybody stands. Three manufacturers presented what their car will be in 2020, and we are happy to see them joining the field of LMP3 for 2020, and hopefully we have a diversity of cars for next year, and we all compete each other with the same regulation.
Do you expect that you'll retain the majority of your current customers? Is that how it feels at the moment?
Like I said, it's too early to say. Obviously, we have done a huge R&D and restyling of the car to stay at the top of the performance of the new regulation. Not only to satisfy all of our existing teams and drivers, but to maintain the competitiveness of the LMP3 against other type of cars. So hopefully we will satisfy all of the existing teams, Ligier teams, and new ones. But it's too early to say. Nobody has tried the car yet, has tried any car, I believe, yet, except our development drivers. So time will tell.
Perfect. Let's move on to talking about Hypercar, because that was obviously a huge press conference that we saw at Le Mans from the ACO. I've spoken to many people in and around the paddock, their thoughts on where this new formula is going. Where does Ligier stand in this? What's your sort of general impression of what we saw?
Ligier is under, I think, like most of OEMs and the constructors, is undergoing an evaluation of this new regulation to see where the opportunities lie for us as a constructor. We have the design capacity, we have the development capacity to build an hypercar. now we need to look at all of the options that gives us this regulation and pick carefully what to work on in the next years.
Are you pleased with the way that this has all been presented? Obviously, it was a bit later than many would have liked, but the actual final regulations, do you think it presents you guys with enough of an opportunity to actually get involved in this?
I would say there is always an opportunity with new regulation. So to be quite straightforward, we need sometimes to investigate all of these opportunities, technically and financially, for Ligier to undertake such work and such program. But for sure, there is opportunities with prototype hybrid, prototype non-hybrid, road car chassis base, and it gives a lot of possibilities for any actor in the industry to join. We need to really work on all of these possibilities and then decide what we can offer as a private constructor to a team or to an OEM to join forces together and try to go win Le Mans and the WEC overall. That's what we want in the end with our Ligier design team, is to design and produce a car that wins Le Mans overall. So this gives us the opportunity to work on such exciting and ambitious program.
We know that there was the potential for DPi to be part of the solution for the ACO and as a bit of a plan B, but that didn't happen. And with Ligier having a stake in what IMSA's got with DPi at the moment with the Nissan, and currently not in LMP1, are you in any way disappointed that we haven't got a global rule set, or do you just think of it as a brand new opportunity and welcome that?
I'm happy I'm not in the feet of the ACO. I think this new regulation of Hypercar gives everyone a new opportunity to start. It's very hard to say if another decision would have been better for WEC and ACO. So I'm not disappointed or happy. Let's put it this way, I'm happier that the regulation has been out and that we can evaluate now what our options are. But obviously, it's I'll be happy when we'll have good news to announce related to this new category.
And let's then change on to IMSA. We just mentioned DPi there, and DPi 2.0 is another talking point in sports car racing at the moment, because that's obviously forming. Scott Atherton says he's expecting to have a draft of the regulations done by the end of this year, giving plenty of time before 2022 when these come in. Where does Ligier currently stand on that? Are you expecting to be part of these new regulations at this point?
We are part of we are a constructor for Nissan in the current regulation, so we are taking part of all the technical working group related to the new regulation, and we will do everything to be present when the season starts in 2022 with a DPi 2.0, whatever the regulation end up to be. It's our, like the Hypercar, we want to be present at the top level at the highest level of endurance racing in the US. So we appreciate the technical discussions we currently, IMSA is currently having with all of the parties involved in the IMSA WeatherTech series.
Give us a flavour of how those discussions are going. Is it all positive at the moment? I know there's obviously the sticking point of hybridisation being part of that and how far they go with it, but in general, do you feel like it's working towards a positive solution?
I think it's always positive to put every pros and cons of a new regulation, and I think all OEMs and constructors are saying what they're thinking. So yes, it's very positive, and IMSA is also saying what they foresee and what they would like to see introduced, and for what reasons and for what purpose. And so yes, so far it has been very positive, and we don't see a reason to not continue in this direction with all the parties involved.
We've obviously got a little bit of time before 2022, and we hear talks of other manufacturers joining in before that time, pretty much by the week at times, rumours and all sorts of speculation. Can you comment on any of that at the moment? Is Ligier currently involved in discussions with manufacturers, and is there any hope that we'll see additional manufacturer entries in DPi before 2.0 comes along, do you think?
No specific comments. We are working with OEMs on DPi programs.